How you doing, Internet? I'm B-Nuts, and may the 4th be with you. That's right, today I'd like to talk Star Wars, and also I'd like to use this as my lazy editor / do not edit challenge. And I believe that's 4 edits, but I'm going to try to do this using my Toastmasters training and trying to cut as little as possible while I talk about Star Wars, what it means to me, and in general. First, to give a little bit of context, Star Wars has always had a large impact and presence within my mind. Whether it's the movies, because I was born around the same time Jedi came out, and so those movies were always a presence in my life. So I watched them with my family repeatedly on video. And then there were the video games, mostly stuff like Dark Forces, X-Wing, TIE Fighter, good stuff. I haven't played many of the more recent games, most of the recent games, but I have played a few of the non-Star Wars LucasArts games as well, such as Day of the Tentacle, which they generally have Star Wars references within them, so it's always fun to see that. And you have some of the toys, and I still have some of them. Fleet Action Micro Machine A-Wing, with folding landing gear, cockpit that can open, and a little pilot figure. And I also have the much smaller A-Wing Micro Machine, see, smaller, and some see-through Fleet Action, the Y-Wing and Slave One. I always thought those were interesting. And the Lambda class Tydean shuttle from Return of the Jedi. Just a few toys. I still have them because I still like them. And then we have the books, and there are over 200 books from the old EU, plus the dozen or so they've created since. And they're not all winners, but a lot of the old EU still has a lot of stuff. So I really liked this series by Karen Traviss, the Republic Commando and the 501st, which really makes one care about the clone troopers. Those were great. This was written much more recently by Timothy Zahn. His books, not just the Star Wars one, but the others, because he was already an award-winning author before he started writing for Star Wars, and these are great. And this one is earlier on, just after Han and Chewie started to work with the Rebel Alliance. So it gives a bit of background that way, and he pulls a team together that does not include Luke or Leia. So it's a pretty interesting book. And of course, Timothy Zahn. And I mentioned X-Wing earlier as the game, but Michael A. Stackpole he wrote the first few ones, and then other authors started contributing to the others, but this is the first in the series. And I really liked it, one, because it centers around a lot of the other pilots who are not Jedi, and these are very interesting characters, like Tycho Kelchu, who's a great character. And you have the others who come along later. Some of them are Jedi, some of them aren't. And of course, you have the first expanded universe book I ever read, probably when I was 9 or 10, and it has some of the most influential and greatest characters, I believe, in Star Wars ever, including Mara Jade, who is my favorite Star Wars character ever, as well as Thrawn, who has such an influence that Disney and LucasArts felt that they had to recanonize him in Rebels. And of course, Zahn has written 2 books about him for the new EU. And on we go with the Zon Streak with Survivor's Quest, which is a later book with Mara and Luke together. And I like Mara because she can be defined not just as who she's with, relationship-wise, but also with her abilities. She was the Emperor's hand, she was his spy, soldier, executor, assassin. And then she became a Jedi with some help from Luke, and she also became a mother and trainer. And she's just an excellent all-around character. And unfortunately, if she was to be included in the new canon, it would just imply that she'd have to die before The Force Awakens, because I doubt that the situation that was around then could happen with her around. Then you have this New Jedi Order series with the Yuuzhan Vong, which are an extremely unusual alien race that was rejected by the Force due to their worship of death and pain. And R.A. Salvatore is an author whom I really like, due mostly because of his Legend of Drizzt series, which is also a great series, but it's fantasy, with the Dark Elf, Ranger, Rogue, and Drizzt Do'Urden. But this was a Star Wars book that he wrote sometime after Drizzt. And a lot of people don't like the New Jedi Order, mostly because of the Vong. But from the ones I've read, it's pretty good, and it poses a lot of interesting moral quandaries. I mean, Star Wars, the entire universe for it, has been presented in an extremely polarizing way. You even have the light side and dark side of the Force. And it's very rare to find a presentation of the two intermixing, or even a gray path, although the gray path does exist, mostly for the fans. And in the Dawn of the Jedi era, the Jedi did exist as Force users who could use light side and dark side and focus mostly on balance between them, as represented as well by their moons Ashla and Bogan. And then later on, those kind of things, that balance with the Force, was also represented with the mother and father, son and daughter. In, I think it's the Star Wars Clone Wars series, they first appeared, but they were also used in the books. And the location for them was also used as one of the final locations in Star Wars Crucible, which could be counted as the final book in the old EU. And we have this one, which I believe is a great book. It's all about the Falcon, its background, and the way it's framed is Han and his granddaughter, Ilana Solo, taking a journey to find out all the secrets and pasts of the Falcon. And I think this would have been a great framing device for the new series of movies, because it gives a sort of present tense framing device, because it's Han and his granddaughter chasing down the story of the Falcon, but a lot of it also takes place in the past. So you get a look at the Falcon when it was being manufactured, and later as the Stellar Envoy on a mission to Coruscant, as it appeared in the second movie, Attack of the Clones. So that was great, and the way I think it could have been used for the movie is Han telling Ilana a story of the past. And this would also allow Disney and Lucasfilm to use Harrison Ford, to use Carrie Fisher, to use Mark Hamill, while also telling stories from after Return of the Jedi, a couple years later. So they could have used that framing device if they had wanted to. And they own all the stories there, and all the others. Now the other thing I wanted to discuss in this video was the main characters for all three trilogies and what I think they represent, because I think that they do have something that each of them represents within their series. They don't represent them nearly as much in the other series, but I think that they stand for these things. I think that they stand for these greater concepts. Now, for Anakin Solo, I believe this is power potential. And power is neither good nor evil in and of itself. It all comes down to how and why it is used and the consequences of its actions, that the power is or can be considered good or evil in the end. And Anakin, because he was born with greater potential than most other Force users, he had greater potential for good and evil power, and what that would entail in the end. And as I said earlier, there are places inside and outside of canon where it has been expressed that the Force, because it has a light side and dark side, while it is presented in a polarizing way, it can be in balance. And I think this is part of the point of the Force, that it should be in balance, as represented in the Jedi Rangers in the Dawn of the Jedi series, between Ashla and Bo-Katan. And I think that Anakin comes the closest out of the three protagonists to come into balance with the Force, although he never actually achieved it. Before his fall, he was able to tap into both the light side and the dark side of the Force, but then he fell into the dark side. And then, when Luke redeemed him, spoilers by the way, when Luke redeemed Darth Vader, when he redeemed Anakin Skywalker, then he was able to die a Jedi on the light side, but he never actually held on to balance, regardless of how long he may have had it. Now, Luke, I think it's fairly obvious, he represented hope in his trilogy in the OT, thus A New Hope. And as long as he was around, there was a certain optimism that the Rebel Alliance might be able to win, that they might be able to claim a victory over the Empire. This, again, a good versus evil thing. And I think that he most represented that in that he was able to change the situation so that it could be winnable, and he was able to go forth and help his friends, and more often than not save them, although sometimes he also needed a little bit of rescuing. But he also represented hope for the Jedi, that they could become better and improve and come out of the situation that they were in after Order 66 and resolve into something new and better. Even if it wasn't powerful, because power isn't everything, if the Jedi had been able to become a bit more as they were in the New Jedi Order series, then they would have much more potential to do good and survive within the universe. Not that they're flawless. I mean, Luke was, in the Fate of the Jedi series, put on trial basically for every time a Jedi had cut off an arm or a leg in pursuit of justice. And who was it who presided over his trial? And former Grand Admiral Natassi Daw, one of his former enemies, but Chief of State for the Galactic Alliance at that time. So all this good and evil stuff, it can flip depending on your perspective, and there is always hope for change. Finally, we come to Rey, and she's much harder to nail down what concept she could represent. And I have two possibilities. One is faith or belief, and the other is resilience or persistence. Because she grew up and survived on a desert world with very little help or support. She did that. She also learned how to fight and scavenge basically on her own to be able to make a living, survive, and sustain her own life. And then she resisted against Kylo Ren, against Snoke, and she is one of the few remaining characters who have survived from the beginning of The Force Awakens until the end of The Last Jedi, making it somewhat of a rarity considering the death toll that has happened in both movies, but she has been able to survive. But I think that persistence and resilience doesn't really cut it as her theme because they're not that strong of themes within these movies, and they don't have quite large enough meaning within the whole. It doesn't rhyme in George Lucas's own terms. I think that faith or belief fits better because even though it can evolve and change, when you have faith or belief in something, it allows you to feel like you're part of something that's larger, bigger than yourself, and more meaningful. And I believe that Rey's belief, her faith, changes over time in the movies. She starts off with a faith that the Force has a larger plan for her, essentially. That she is something, or that she is part of something greater. And she is going to become something bigger, even though she doesn't have any memory of her past. And even though, for at least part of The Force Awakens, all she wanted to do was go back home and go back to a normal life. And I believe that her belief started to shift once she got introduced to all the other people and the situation in the wider galaxy, just as Luke did before her. And I think that part of the reason why her faith shifted was her exposure to others. So as she interacted with Han and Chewie and Leia and then Luke, Kylo and Snoke and all the others, she first developed a faith, a trust in others, especially the legends, and then when the legends fell off their pedestals in her mind, her faith again shifted away from them. And by the end, I believe that Rey's faith, her trust, her belief, it will shift to herself, and she will become entirely self-sustaining and self-reliant in the end. And in order to become the big hero and defeat the Empire this time, she will have to rely on herself and her own power. She will have to have faith and believe in herself. And that's why I think Rey represents belief and faith, and mostly shifting to herself. Although I hope there will be some other characters on whom she can rely by the end of episode 9, because she's become pretty isolated in the past few movies, and that can be pretty unhealthy in the end if you're all on your own and you can't rely on anyone else, especially for something that's galaxy spanning as Star Wars tends to be. And I think that about does it for this video. I believe it's already gone on for almost 20 minutes of me pretty much just rambling what I think of Star Wars. But even though it may have suffered a blow as a franchise, story-wise and character-wise recently, it is still very important to me. It is still a big part of my life, and something that I still do enjoy watching or reading about. So that about does it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can leave a like, comment below what you thought, subscribe to show your support for my channel, and visit my Patreon. So thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye!